Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Star Wars video. This is going to be my review for Star Wars Tales of the Underworld. So this is the third season of Star Wars Tales of this format where they do two characters who each get three kind of mini episodes, like 15 minutes instead of a full 22 minutes. This time out for Underworld, it is Asajj Ventress and Cad Bane. So let's kind of jump in here, because surprisingly, I don't feel there's maybe a massive amount to go through here because while I enjoyed everything here, like this was a fun, hour and a half or so kind of going through all of this, I definitely think there is a bit of a sense that the Ventress stuff can mostly be summed up as, hey, this character, here's some transitional content explaining her Bad Batch appearance, and hey, we have something planned for her, and we're going to do it at some point in the future. That's the takeaway, I think, from the Ventress stuff. I'll get into some of the details, because especially I think the first episode with Ventress is actually really, really good. The other two, I don't think maybe add as much onto the dynamic, and maybe feel like, okay, let's wait until we maybe get into whatever project Ventress is going to turn up in again. The Cad Bane stuff is interesting because it's his full-on backstory. But he is an interesting situation where I'm not sure he's a character I ever thought of as, yeah, I need Cad Bane's backstory. Then when I think about it in terms of like, okay, what in any way would I be expecting from Cad Bane's backstory? It probably was something equivalent to what we got. I still come out of it feeling like it wasn't necessarily something I absolutely needed, in the sense that it doesn't add too much to his character. Are they trying to set up something with Cad Bane for the future? Not necessarily. Like, there's maybe the slight hint with, his son. But it's nowhere near as obvious as the Ventress setup, where there's so many open plot threads that they didn't address in the episodes with her. Whereas the Cad Bane one was just literally his backstory. Like, it wasn't presented as like, this is the furthest into the future for Ventress. No, this was just full backstory. It wasn't even Cad Bane in the present reflecting back. It was just backstory. And I enjoyed it. It was interesting because it was more of a kind of maybe low-key backstory where it kind of went the way you expected it to, because he was not a character I think they were ever going to go down the road of trying to make you feel an immense amount of sympathy for the character, other than, okay, he comes from a bit of a kind of rough upbringing, but every time he maybe had the choice to go down a better path, like some of the other characters in the episode, he continues on down the Underworld path to becoming the character that we know him to be. So they didn't like overdo that, which was, I think, quite good. But yeah, let's get into going through these kind of more step by step here. So we'll go back to Ventress here to start us off with the first episode, A Way Forward. Fascinating opening. Like, probably the best stuff from overall Tales of the Underworld was just seeing this opening kind of partial adaptation of the very end of Dark Disciple, the novel, but then directly answering the question everyone had from the Bad Batch appearance of Ventress, as in, how is she still alive? It's a fascinating scene from multiple angles, mainly because of the existence of the book Dark Disciple, because if you have literally watched everything Star Wars but have never read a Star Wars book, you would be missing a giant portion of Ventress's story. To the point where, like, the Bad Batch must have been incredibly confusing. This must have been, like, even more confusing, because it's like, wait, she died? But Bad Batch, and then you're like, wait, she was in a relationship with Quinlan Voss? When did that happen? And it's interesting because I think it's one of the few times we have ever really seen a Star Wars thing, a big detail, plot, character, event, kind of completely hinge on have you read a book or not. Something that's not just a reference, but it's like a key part of their arc. That's just, if you haven't read the book, they're not really going to tell you about it. Now, interestingly, I think the main examples would be Dark Disciple, and then also there's was the Son of Dathomir, the the comic series that covers the transition of Darth Maul from his like imprisonment to kind of being active again. They're probably the two main examples of it where, like, yeah, you kind of needed to read something in publishing to know what's actually going on in the kind of animated content. And interestingly, both of those are because the Clone Wars was cancelled at a certain point. They chose to do these planned arcs of the show in a novel and in a comic instead of like animating them somewhere. So I appreciate that they're committing to keeping them canon. It's always just the interesting thing about how do they handle that when we get to it. And they chose the path of basically, yeah, read the book. You have to do a bit of research, read the book if you want full context here, because they only gave you like a minute of adaptation here. Everything else was new, effectively. And there's no like flashback as you go through of like Ventress remembering the events of Dark Disciple. It's just, no, you need that context from the book if you want to know what's going on. Now, what they do here is that, of course, Quinlan Vos and Obi-Wan Kenobi oversee Quinlan bringing Ventress back to Dathomir to kind of rest her in the burial pool on Dathomir. There's obviously tradition there. And as they walk away, they've kind of laid her to rest. She wakes up in the water and is in this kind of limbo for a moment here. This is where she's contacted by Mother Talzin and basically given the opportunity to go down one of two paths. You can either choose to stay here with the kind of fallen Night Sisters and Talzin, or you can return to the living. But in exchange for this, she has to basically give up her heart's desire. Now, they never really clarify precisely what is meant by this, in the sense of like what would happen were she to meet Quinlan Vos again, what has changed about her, what has she given up, because there is a cost of some sort associated with her resurrection here. Now, at the start of this explanation, it's also kind of explained that it seems like this is an option open to Ventress because Quinlan loved her. It's like it was a gift. Because he said, I love you, this gives power to kind of allow her to go down this path. It seems like potentially in exchange for you can live again, but you can maybe never have that romance again or something like that. Which is fascinating because, of course, over the course of these episodes, eventually she comes across the idea that if she follows the path, which is obviously the Quinlan Vos thing, trying to kind of protect Jedis and Padawans who are out there post Order 66. If she follows that path, she can potentially meet up with Quinlan again, and she pursues that. So it's not that the sacrifice is just that she doesn't love or care about him anymore, but there's clearly some sense for, like, if she was to meet him again, what would happen? Would she just die on the spot? We don't know. What has actually been lost in exchange for her life? And I think that's part of why there's pretty clear, I think, setup for probably something to happen in the future with Ventress. And this isn't just a kind of one and done type thing. So that was super interesting because it doesn't get fleshed out kind of beyond that. There's this vague bargain that was made and Ventress is back. Now, the timeline is a bit weird because they don't really overly clarify it, but my interpretation of this is that this is after that initial scene, everything else in the rest of these episodes is post her appearance in the Bad Batch, because while she's there, she is still partially a bounty hunter, whereas when we see her here at the start, she's clearly left the bounty hunting behind and is more of just a security kind of worker. So that's kind of my interpretation of this. This is post Bad Batch Ventress appearance. So the basic gist of the rest of the episode is her meeting the new kind of Padawan Order 66 survivor character Lyko, who comes in, tries to use the Force to get a ticket off planet for cheaper. It doesn't work. Ventress ends up basically protecting him here, seeing that some incident is about to go down. She's quickly drawn into chaos and her peaceful life is immediately shattered, thrown up in the air. And this is where he reveals he's looking for the path. Quinlan Voss runs it, and this seems to be where she discovers that this is actually the thing. So she kind of helps him because this gives her the option to maybe come into contact with Quinlan, of course. So we end the opening episode with her revealing to him who she actually is, that, you know, she was a separatist kind of commander basically, and she probably killed people that he knew and cared about based on her past. So they are careful about that. They bring this up here. They bring it up, I guess, in episode 3. They also cover this idea of, in this new era, does the war, Republic versus Separatist, kind of mean anything now that we're in this against the Empire era? And that's the kind of interesting idea for there. So then, yeah, Quinlan, Ventress is looking for Quinlan, of course. This is where the second episode mostly focuses on the reintroduction of her kind of bounty hunter kind of companions from previously, Lats and the droid. And basically they do a job with them with the idea that they will give a certain amount of information. They've heard something about the path. And it mostly just plays off the idea that as former bounty hunting companions, they're not really on maybe great terms. They're very quick to double cross each other at any point. The mission doesn't go to plan. There's an immediate attempt at a betrayal to capture Lyko, because if they sell him to the Empire, they've got more money than the shield relay unit. But eventually Ventress comes back, saves the day, saves Lyko, and they get the coordinates to move on. Leading us to the third episode, which is the kind of odd episode. It's kind of weird, but there's some interesting stuff here. They go to this kind of planet. It's mostly a desert. There seems to be an oasis, but then they meet this farmer who's actually this former separatist kind of leader character. He's there with his granddaughter, I think it is, and basically they'll help if Ventress and Lyko help to get some water, basically, with the help of the granddaughter. They do this, they come into contact with the kind of raiders, the inhabitants of the planet, leading to, I suppose, Lyko showing maybe Ventress a different way of doing things. It doesn't have to always be chaos, combat. He uses some of his language skills to actually negotiate with them, with the idea that he can now open a dialogue between the separatist guy who's had fights with the raiders before, and negotiate something. This also brings up the idea that he immediately recognizes that Ventress is a former separatist leader herself and has a great respect for that. We do see that Ventress, in talking about the previous conflict, is very much, because she's basically, I suppose, aware of what exactly happened, that both sides were kind of played against each other. She doesn't have those loyalties from what happened in the past. She's already kind of moved on from that. Lyko's basically able to move on as well, and it seems like by the end of the episode the farmer separatist guy is also able to do that. Pretty simple conflict. It wasn't my favorite kind of thing we've ever kind of seen before, but okay, former separatist leader post-war, that's kind of an interesting idea and concept. We haven't seen that too much. Final bit is that they get to the path ship about to take off. Lyko kind of is about to go off by himself. Ventress, interestingly, kind of refuses to actually go down with him, because it seems like here she makes the decision that, to a certain extent, I guess, either she is not kind of worthy to go, or something about the way she was revived means she maybe in the end accepts that she probably can't go, or something will happen, or she's unwilling to test the limits of what actually is going on here. Now, I didn't get the impression Quinlan was right there, but that they would be brought effectively almost to where Quinlan was. But it's still widely open by the end of the episode, where we do get the reveal that Lyko's actually come back to travel with Ventress. And this is the clear setup for something in the future. These two characters have been paired together now, that they are going to travel together. And it seems like Ventress has maybe found the right path for her at this point in her life, which is that maybe she doesn't need the peaceful life, but this will allow her to do something in a kind of nicer way, because she's seen Lyko show her how to resolve a conflict without violence, she gets a chance, I guess, to be a teacher, which we maybe haven't seen her kind of really be in a lot of previous episodes. And there's just, it feels like that's a new dynamic, a new angle for her. And it's also kind of classic Star Wars, especially some of the more recent modern Star Wars. They really like doing this sort of found family plot, like with Grogu, Omega in the Bad Batch, and now kind of this dynamic kind of feels somewhat similar. So where are they going to show up again is I think the real question coming out of this. Are they going to show up in the Darth Maul show that we know is coming? Is she going to get her own show? Are they setting up a lot of these characters for maybe an appearance in Ahsoka? But that's kind of skipping ahead quite a bit. Because again, from the previous stuff, like we have the Barriss setup, it feels like Barriss is probably going to appear maybe in Ahsoka at some point. What is the clear Ventress setup here? Is this enough for an entire show? That's where I'm not sure about, unless Ventress gets involved in something bigger, which maybe is the one connection that you might be able to do to Maul. That might be a way to properly bring him into play, because that show seems to be, at least from the little bit I looked up, trying to do the transition between basically where we're explaining the solo appearance of Maul. So that's that. Definitely feels like more of a backdoor pilot, especially I think the fact that this was more than maybe the first episode. Because I think if you had a slightly different format, I would borderline say that the first episode, maybe slightly extended, is enough to set up Ventress's arc. Maybe with like a little bit more detail. The whole, did you need episode 2 and 3 in addition to everything? Maybe not as much, but I do want to know where she is a kind of appearing next. But, you know, overall, I think it was really good, especially just those opening kind of moments. I thought Lyko actually was a pretty good character to pair her up with. They seem to have a good dynamic. And again, I'm always interested to see where the surviving Order 66 characters go. Where did they end up? In a way, what is the new ending for Ventress as a character now after this? She has been revived, but to a certain degree, like, for what aim? It does feel like we probably eventually have to build up to a Quinlan Vos moment, because we've known for a while now that Quinlan Vos has kind of survived Order 66, but we have very little content with him. Basically, after this scene, I think this might be the furthest scene into the future we have with Quinlan, outside of, like, you know, I think the Obi-Wan show mentions Quinlan, but we've not actually covered the details of him past this in story content, and that's fascinating. So where are we doing it? That's the big question I have. Moving on to the Cad Bane stuff, I don't think I have as much to say about this, because while I think this is pretty nicely done across the 3 episodes, the Cad Bane backstory here does feel very much a sort of thing where, you know, because they're not really trying to give you any, I would say, particular extra insight into his character, it is just his backstory. As in, like, he becomes a bounty hunter. We know what he goes on to become after the end of, like, episode 6 here. The way he gets there is sort of like, okay, yeah, that sort of idea. You know, he grew up as like an orphan on the streets. He had this friend, Nero. They encountered this gang leader, Laszlo. He kind of helps them out, gives them money. He wants to kind of bring them into the gang. You know, young Cad, or Colby, as we find out his actual name is all in. Nero has some doubts. And the first episode basically ends with this robbery gone wrong, at least for Nero. The others get away, but Nero, Colby's friend, does get captured by the police. And the idea here is that this is this moment of destiny for the 2 friends, basically. That this means that Colby is basically inducted into the gang. This is his life going forward. Whereas Nero getting arrested allows him to turn his life around, and he actually becomes a police officer by the next time we see him. So, interesting stuff there, especially because, you know, we get to see they're both Duros, so we get to see the planet Duro here, and that's always interesting to see a primarily kind of alien planet, and And it was especially funny seeing like the shop and the idea of like, here's the sweets section, and they just spend the money Laszlo gives them on, what do they call them, crunchies, which are basically just like kind of pick and mix sweets, which was kind of a fun little sequence there to see them just going crazy on the sweets. The fifth episode, we do time skip quite a bit through a lot of time here. So now an adult, but kind of youngish adult, I guess. He's now Cad Bane. We find out that Laszlo has been killed by the Marshal of Duro. So the kind of head officer, basically, from where he was. He goes back there to basically take revenge, because they very much tried to connect the idea of Cad Bane sees something in Laszlo. The look with the hat, that the lifestyle, the fact that he was someone who gave him money at a time where he didn't have any. It's just those little things that he's really latched onto, and this is his guy. And so Laszlo being killed, he's now part of the gang, there's a loyalty there. He wants to go back and take revenge at the cost of everything. Because we see he has this kind of, I guess, girlfriend in Aaron here. I think there's a subtle hint at one point in the episode that she is pregnant. They don't overdo it, but you look back after the reveal in episode 6 and you kind of get the impression of kind of what happens here. So yeah, Bane does end up killing the Marshal, but it's very much the idea that he stays there long enough making this happen to the point where there's no way out. He basically kind of sacrifices his future with Aaron in a pretty good place to kill the Marshal here, and there's no way he can fight his way out. There is a quote-unquote betrayal by Aaron as she kind of throws his gun away so he can't potentially go down firing type thing. And yeah, he then has to basically surrender to Nero, who's kind of the second in command of the police force at this point in time. So this is where he's put in prison, of course. And there's a real clear sense that they've both gone down, the two friends have gone down different paths. Episode 6 then goes on to the idea that Nero, a few years later, Nero is now a Marshal. Bane has been just released from prison. And basically he's coming back to Duro to basically take revenge against Nero for kind of putting him in jail and everything that happened. He also, I guess, wants to see Aaron again because, in a way, of what happened. And yeah, we get the setup here, some interesting stuff, like Nero and Aaron got married, apparently. Aaron had a child, but Aaron has died as of a few years prior. Bane actually kills Nero in their duel, as you would expect, of course, because Bane survives well past this point, of course. With the big reveal in the final episode being that Nero's child, Nero and Aaron's child, is actually Aaron and Bane's child. But he has the moment where he makes this connection and he like maybe thinks about kind of reaching out, but then just leaves. And this is the moment where you realize that, like, yeah, the build-up of this is not to present some sort of deeply tragic backstory for him, but to just highlight that, yeah, he's a bounty hunter, he's a gang member, he is a criminal, he is a bad guy. That even in this moment where he has a chance to do something kind of good, he doesn't do it. Now, there's some interesting stuff to get into on this, in the sense that in his thought process, does he leave the child behind because he just doesn't care? Or is there maybe a little bit of a sense of like, I've got my revenge, but it's maybe better that the child grows up here rather than with me as a criminal? And then there's the idea of what does Isaac, the child, kind of grow up to become? The idea, I guess, would be that in maybe Isaac's want for revenge, he grows up to become a police officer, marshal, like his actual, the person who actually raised him. And that the setup for the future might be that Isaac kills Bane. That maybe feels like the natural conclusion to this arc, potentially. In terms of, like, I didn't obviously read what was happening here as a real sense that, like, this is set up for something in the future, but the open plot thread of Cad Bane has a child is interesting if we ever come back to it. Now, of course, Bane was quote-unquote killed in Book of Boba Fett, but he's actually still alive, so there's a chance for him to come back. The they obviously, I guess, committed in that moment to they don't want Boba to be the one who full-on kills him. So what will be the end of Bane as a character? And it feels like the setup probably is here to bring his sort of, slightly tragic kind of tale to an end. And like if there's anything kind of more to be done here. I enjoyed it because it was such a kind of almost unexpected backstory. I was just like, oh yeah, Cad Bane, what was his thing? I didn't feel like it was unlike certain other characters where I'm like desperate to know their backstory. This was a character where it's like, okay, more Bane, that's cool. I don't feel it's maybe super required, but it didn't feel like it was like absolutely superfluous or anything like that. It was enjoyable. It was similar, maybe slightly better than maybe some of the Morgan Elsbeth stuff from the last season of Tales of the Jedi, where that maybe more felt like this is just focused on a character and did we accomplish anything here? Whereas at least just the straight up backstory is like, are we ever going to focus on Cad Bane enough in any content going forward where we would get his backstory in any other way than the literal backstory group of episodes here? And in that sense, that's, I think, why they did it this way, ultimately. So, an interesting group of episodes in the sense that you have one that I think very clearly is the setup for the future, and then the other one is more of a, oh, that was a nice to know backstory, maybe like one thread that can connect to something. Tales, I think, just continues to feel a little bit inconsistent, in the sense that they only do 2 characters. You often, I think, come out of these wondering, why only 6 episodes? Why only 2 characters? Why is the format so set in stone that it has to be 3 episodes per character? Whereas, like I said, the Ventress stuff, I think you maybe could have done in 1, maybe 2 episodes, given what you wanted to accomplish here. I think maybe you could have cut down the Cad Bane stuff into 2, and leave yourself the opening to do another character with 2 episodes. And I think that's what I would want coming out of this, is just a little bit more variety, so that you have a more of an opportunity to hit kind of harder. Whereas, so far it's like Tales of the Jedi was like, the Dooku stuff was very good. The Ahsoka stuff, outside of 1 or 2 scenes, kind of felt like this didn't really add all that much. Tales of the Empire was, the Morgan Elsbeth stuff was like, okay, a few nice references with the Thrawn stuff, how she met Thrawn, but kind of and then the Barriss stuff was actually interesting, but again was ultimately felt like more of a setup for that this character's now active into the future, because we've done the little transition arc here with her. But now you have a situation where like a lot of these characters, you're wondering, when are we going to see them again? Like, when is Barriss showing up? When's Ventress showing up again? What's the next thing Cad Bane's going to appear in? To get the rest of the story, if there is any more. They're the questions kind of coming out of it. Again, as kind of almost like an extra piece of content, because that's the way they're kind of done, I think, and the fact that this is the 3rd season of it where they've continued with this just seems to be a pretty set format that they have. I wouldn't mind it continuing, but I would maybe like to see a little bit of evolution, and the format's maybe becoming a little bit stale, when I think if you had a little bit more opportunity to just, here's a 1 episode arc, here's a 2 episode arc, maybe even here's a full 6 episodes about 1 character, if they're important enough, if you have the right story to tell. That's kind of the way I would want it, as a pure anthology show that is just telling important stories. But that's that. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts were on Tales of the Underworld. What did you think of the Ventress stuff? Both in terms of, I suppose, the Dark Disciple connections there, but also maybe the plan for Asajj into the future. And then Cad Bane's backstory. What were your thoughts there? Did you have any expectations ahead of time? And compared to what we actually got, what were your thoughts? But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.